Hi everybody, welcome to the Center for Spiritual Care and another exhibition, this one by Susan Hale. I'm Ellen Fischer and this is Susan Hale. Hello Susan.
Hi Ellen, nice to see you.
It's nice to see you too. When did we last speak when I came to your studio?
It had to be several months ago, I think.
Yeah, maybe a year.
Maybe a year
maybe
ago?
A whole year.
Time flies,
and
probably.
I remember some of the things in this exhibition from our talk in your studio. But there are so many new ones, and so many that complement, new ones that complement the old ones, and yet they're all different. I don't know how to say it, but nothing is the same. They're all different, but you can tell that you did them. When did you start painting?
Probably now about 20 years ago, I think, or maybe even a little longer. I had been making jewelry with metal and stones, and then I got into enameling because I got interested in color. Or no, I got into enameling and then I got interested in color, and that's why I started painting. I got into watercolor, started learning how to do watercolor. And
yeah, enameling is all about jewel-like colors. And
yes, exactly.
Watercolor is a nice step from that.
I loved
it's
watercolor.
Transparent and very beautifully colored. There are two watercolors in this show, and they're the oldest works in this show.
Yes.
And they are called Fischer's and A Change of Mood. And one of the things I have to compliment you on is the way the paintings are arranged and the collages in this particular show, because you've almost got them paired off, 2 by 2 by 2, completely different works, but they have a common spirit. They're hanging next to each other. I almost think that if someone bought one, they'd almost have to buy the other, because there's such a nice conversation going on between these pairs. But Fischer's and A Change of Mood are very nice. Are they, about a decade old or younger than that?
Probably, almost.
Almost?
Yeah.
You say these were the last watercolors you did before you got into acrylic and oil and things like that?
I started exploring other media. I'm curious about other media and curious about doing new things. And so I took a foray into oil and then acrylic and then started doing collage. And I kind of do all of those things still. I haven't done much watercolor lately, but I like to try new things. And
well, what did you like about the watercolor coming from enamels?
I liked it working wet and wet, the immediacy of it. And you had to really work fast to do what I wanted to do. And you couldn't have total control over it. And then some of these beautiful things happen that you can't really control.
Entirely different from enameling, where you have to have a plan.
Yeah. So it's control. You have enough control in that you know how much water needs to be with the pigment and how it reacts. So you kind of have to know that. But then you get to sort of play with it and let it do its thing.
The thing I like about your watercolors is that you have such a restrained touch. You know, you put just enough in. For example, with Fischer's, there's this beautiful wash of color into which the little plants up above seem to be sending roots, as though they're thirsty plants in the desert. And also with the other one, The Change of Mind, it's almost like a rainstorm or a threatening rain. They're very poetic works.
Thank you.
How did you know when to stop? Because you never crossed over the line, at least in these two that we're looking at today, into, oh, I shouldn't have done that.
Well, they happen really fast. I work really fast with the watercolors. And so I'm turning it different ways to make the paint flow certain ways.
Oh, okay.
And I separate them with just the plain paper, and I do different things, but I turn them upside down, turn them different ways. And that's one thing I love about it. You can't do too much to it, or you'll ruin a watercolor. You just kind of have to let it do its thing in some ways. I mean, it would be different with a representational painting.
So it's sort of a collaboration with the material, with the medium.
Definitely.
I want to say, too, that these are fairly small works. The Fischer's is 11.5 by 8 inches, and A Change of Mood is 11 by 8.25 inches. So they're like a sheet of paper, of typing paper.
Exactly, yeah.
And I would say that in all of your works, starting with the watercolors to the collages and the oils, a person has to get up close to really appreciate the microcosm inside. You have a picture there, but until you get inside and you see the granular look of these washes and the tiny fissures or marks that the paint itself made. It's really quite nice. It's really quite poetic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The fissures one, the paint, some of the paint in there is granular. They have watercolors that actually have granulation,
Yes.
which give those effects and lends itself really well to.
Well, you certainly chose the right materials for that one.
Thank you.
I thought we'd talk a little bit about some more recent work, and that would be Arroyo. And I'm going to introduce these as pairs because, as I say, when you come to the show and you see them paired off, you say, this is perfect. It couldn't be any different. So you have Arroyo and you have I Stopped to Catch My Breath. They're across the room over here. And tell me what your technique is in there. Those are panels, right?
Those are cradled panels. And I used oil and a medium called cold wax, which is like a very rich, buttery, thick substance. When you combine it with the paint, it allows you to put down layers and make scraping and mark through the layers and remove layers. And it's really versatile. It also helps the oil paint to dry a little faster than it normally would with other mediums. And so you can be very expressive. The paintings I do with oil and cold wax have many layers. And I'll put down contrasting layers, and then I'll start marking through them, maybe removing some, and then I'll just keep doing it and doing more layers and more marks until I come up with something that works.
Or until something says, I'm finished.
Yes.
Were you thinking of maps? I mean, they look a little bit like satellite pictures of the desert or Mars or...
No, but they could be from, well, I think the Arroyo one is probably from maybe remembering New Mexico or something. It didn't, when it started, I wasn't thinking of New Mexico, but the colors, once it started coming out, I thought, that does look a little like New Mexico.
Sort of like a baked earth of New Mexico.
And the other one, I wasn't thinking of anything really particularly.
That one reminds me of irrigation ditches. In Florida, maybe there's canals and irrigation ditches and groves.
I can see that, yeah. So, my paintings come from memories or from responses to experiences or maybe imagined things, not real things or dreams. So some of them are a conglomeration of different things, and I don't even know sometimes where they come from. But
do you think certain colors or textures or spark those memories as you're working? I mean, your mind is...
Colors, yes.
You're not really trying for any particular outcome. I mean, this isn't like a vase of flowers where you say, well, the peonies are going to go here and there's some daisies. This is something that develops as you work it.
Yes, because I used to do sort of semi-realistic work in the beginning. And if you're painting a mountain, you know what it's supposed to look like.
Sure.
So that's fine, you feel satisfied. But then I have no idea when I'm starting one of these paintings what the outcome's going to be. And I kind of like that surprise and the kind of chance of what could happen.
How long do you think it would take to make a painting like Arroyo? Because you say you work in many, many layers, and when it's done, it's all of a sudden it's done. You might work on it and set it aside for a while and come back. Is that how you work?
Yes. Some things, sometimes I often work in series so that one talks to another as I'm doing them.
Okay.
But sometimes I'll pretty much go over several layers, and something might emerge. It might take longer. It might happen really fast. They're all different. Some of them happen faster than others. Some of them I have to put aside for a while and then come back to them.
It sounds like your working technique is contemplative. Do you work in silence or do you work with music?
I usually work with music.
What kind?
Jazz or classical normally. Yeah, and it's intuitive. It's pretty intuitive, my process. In other words, I start out making a mark, perhaps not knowing what I'm going to do, and then I'll keep putting layers of paint and different marks on, and suddenly something will be there that I can sort of a composition of some kind that that's coming into being, and
It's almost like a little hook that you can grab onto,
yeah.
and it pulls you in,
Yeah.
and maybe tells you what to do next.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that some people, artists for sure, know that their work speaks back. I mean, it's not just you battling away and trying to create something out of nothing. It's a dance, it's a conversation
Really
with this object, with this creation that's coming
Some of them really just happen just like that, really just so easily.
Naturally.
Just one mark makes you know what to do next, or one
Those happen
swath of
seldom
paint.
to me, I know. Do those come easily to you sometimes? Or
sometimes,
can you
not
have a
always.
streak of them just popping out and you say, gee, maybe this is too easy. These are looking too good. What's wrong?
Not usually. You know, some are easier than others. Some of them take a while. Could take, months. I might put them aside for months.
What would you say that the ones that take a long time and that are really difficult or seem to have difficulty coming to completion, do you think that those in a way are more worthwhile than the ones that just flow out of you?
Not necessarily. I think maybe the ones that are difficult is because I'm thinking too much at one point, because I usually start playing in play mode when I'm beginning, and then at some point I start discerning what I'm doing. I start seeing things and discerning things, and then I can go back into play mode, and then I go back and forth. It's kind of a push-pull.
Yes.
But if I'm too much in my head, it's
everything sort of comes to a grinding halt.
So I have to just, sometimes if something doesn't work, I'll just cover it almost totally up with something else, or part of it, and then just start again, and then you can come up with something.
When you see it anew, you can see it with new eyes after a little while of it being covered up.
I find that if I take risks, sometimes you're looking at a painting and you think, oh, I don't know if I should do anything more, I might ruin it. But sometimes by taking a risk, first of all, I learn more. I learn things, and it sometimes works out better that way. So.
I was wondering that's sounds wonderful actually to me, because to push it or not to push it past that line. I want to keep having pictures come up on the screen, so I want to talk about 3 of them that are behind us, and they seem to be a trio. All the Lights Came On, and Time Capsule, and Flow. These are all acrylics. And sometimes I think I've mentioned to you that your work is a little like printmaking. I think you actually use some stenciling in your work, which is sort of a basic type of printmaking. Is that true?
I make my own stencils with paper. I'll just tear organic shapes out, or non-organic shapes. I'll do that sometimes. And so I make my own stencils, and so some of the shapes come out like that, but some of them don't. Some of them I just paint on there.
These 3, I think, are a good example, though, of that stencil technique, because you seem to use some of the same shapes in each one.
I seem to have, don't I? Yeah.
But again, I think when you were hanging the show with Zach Gruber and Warren Obluck, it must have been sort of a playful arrangement then, too, because people would say, hey, look at these 3 together.
And Tim Sanchez, too, yeah.
Oh, and
they
Tim.
were wonderful. We had a wonderful fun doing it, and they have such good eyes.
I think so, yeah. Hanging a show is an art unto itself, a little bit. Well, what were you thinking of when you did this particular series of 3?
Well, actually, I wasn't doing those at the same time.
Oh, really?
No.
Oh, my goodness.
No. Well, actually, the top 2 I think I was, perhaps, but not the bottom one. But I do have color palettes that I really love that seem to reappear, combinations of colors. I like to change them too, but I do sort of have some colors that reappear a lot.
Sometimes I think I remember in your studio you playing just with the color on pieces of paper to see colors that you felt looked good together, or that had a certain something going that you might use later.
I like to mix different colors and come up with unusual colors.
That you can use then later and remember how you did them.
Yeah.
Because I think that, while these are very spontaneous, there is something very thoughtful about them. And when I was looking at all of your studies and sketches and stencils, I could see how much preparation went into these. so that you would have the materials you needed at hand. I think you would make these shapes, but you wouldn't know exactly how they would fit into the next painting.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, pretty neat.
And sometimes I make just the paper stencils just for one painting, and then because usually they get ruined, especially if I'm using oil or something, and then I'll make different ones for another painting. But I tend to use a lot of organic shapes, but I also use geometric shapes too.
Yes.
Kind of both. Certain organic shapes
And you use a lot of overlapping as well, which I think is really wonderful. And I think if we look at Conversation with a Friend and Have You Seen My Scissors, another wonderful pair hanging in this show. Again, completely different, but the same, only different, sort of. Except in Conversation with a Friend, some of your artworks look so much like tissue paper collage. And it's actually very, very thin, almost scraped off after you apply it, veils of paint that show what's underneath them. And I think that's really well illustrated in Conversation with a Friend.
Thanks.
Could you tell us a little more about that technique? How did you come up with this, and how do you thin the paint? Now this is an acrylic, and the last three we spoke of were acrylics as well.
Yeah.
How do you, first of all, what's the difference between oil and acrylic for you?
Well, acrylic dries really fast, for one thing, so you can add layers quicker, and you can move quicker, whereas with oil, however, oil and cold wax does dry faster than normal oil paint with other mediums, so that's one thing I like about it. You can do layers fairly quickly over each other with the oil and cold wax. So I just, in this one particular one, I just started with some paint, and then I like the veiled look. I like there to be depth in these pictures. And so I do that with the white. Sometimes I use a watered down white, or well, not with water, but some medium that makes it sheer.
Make it really translucent.
Yeah, and then I just scrape it or blot it, or different things I do with it.
Do you use like a spackling knife or metal spatula or plastic?
I have all kinds of tools that are not brushes, that are scrapers and all kinds of.
Do you like to go to the hardware store
I
and see
love
what
to
you
go to the hardware store, even the kitchen supply store.
Oh yes, to see what
It's like a candy store for me.
I think that's really pretty wonderful. I also see a little bit of what looks like drawing in here, and also some drawing with a brush. There's a little mark in the
right
lower.
there?
Yes. What is it's either an eyelash or it's a little foot bridge. There's so many things that little symbolic looking mark could be.
I put that there because I thought it needed some contrast in that particular quadrant. And it's totally different than the other shapes there.
Yes.
But I kind of like that little mark too.
It almost seems, it almost has a landscape quality for me, because I guess I think bridge first.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. Oh, I never thought of that.
A little bit.
I love to hear what other people see.
I think it would be, that one really I think would be a conversation starter because of that simple little element there that just gives a spark to the rest.
Yeah.
And then Have You Seen My Scissors? Now there is collage in this one, correct?
Yes, it's all collage. Well, actually, there's a base coat of paint under the whole piece.
Okay.
And then there are several layers of collage. And I cover the layers with a medium, and it gives it even more depth, the medium does.
And then you use some sandpaper on there, or somehow you rub, because there's a real erasure of color in places.
Some of it I actually peel some of it off, and some of it I sand.
I see in the upper left-hand corner what looks like a wing, part of a bird's wing. Or else they're scissors, I don't know.
No, that's just that was just an image.
I think that's the only recognizable image, and that's why I wondered if some of this was paint. Did you paint on some paper?
I paint on papers a lot.
And some of that occurred in here as well.
I have piles of papers by category of color that I paint. Tissues, I use tissue paper to paint. I use other papers, but I like to use really thin papers. But I'll paint on anything, or I'll use a brayer or brush that has extra paint, and I'll roll it off on paper, maybe sheet music or anything, and then later I can use it for collage.
That is wonderful. That must be a very nice afternoon's
It's really
activity.
fun.
Yeah.
I love working with collage.
There is some sheet music in this one as well. Where was that sheet music from?
My mother was a piano player, and so these are some things. I saved some of the music books she had. Some of them were beautiful. They had these covers with really beautiful designs on them. So I have a whole pile.
So there's something very personal and historical in there for you.
Absolutely.
Is it hard to think of selling your work sometimes?
Once in a while, I'm very fond of one, but you know, one of the reasons I paint is that I want to be able to share my work with other people and have a conversation with them, have something that they may resonate with. And I think it completes a painting when it's in someone's home. You know, when it's kind of a cycle that a painting goes through, I think. And I think that's part of the cycle. So by letting them go, you have room to make more of them.
I think that's a good philosophy. I want to mention also that these are also on panel. They're wood panels, correct?
Most of them, yes, most all of them are.
And
cradle
they're
panels.
only 12 by 12 inches.
These, yes, all these small ones, right?
Most of the work in this room is fairly small and almost square, if not square. Do you like this particular size, the smaller size to work?
I like small, I like larger too. I like the square format because I like that you can turn it. When I work, I'll turn the picture around and see what it looks like upside down or sideways, and that's a way I can tell what it might need to balance it or for the composition.
The equilateral sides work out well for that. I think sometimes that the square format is the most abstract to start with.
Do you?
It doesn't suggest a landscape like a horizontal format would, or a portrait as a vertical one would. And I think the idea of turning them and rotating them till you find what is up, north, south, east, and west is a help in keeping it abstract and keeping it unpredictable a little bit. Let's talk about a couple that are over here, and that would be Traces of an Earlier Time and Through the Looking Glass. These are incredibly different pieces. One is in cold wax, and actually they both are, but they have such different feelings. I thought, when I just looked at them, that one might be an acrylic, because another difference between the acrylic and the wax is that you both can do many layers in these mediums, but the acrylic turns out very thin, and the cold wax is thick.
Yes. Right.
So tell me about those two. Start with either one, the Traces of an Earlier Time.
Traces of an Earlier Time is oil and cold wax, and I had so much fun with that. When I started out, I think I had 3 layers of contrasting color or value and or value. And it was when I was first starting to use oil and cold wax, and I wasn't quite sure what to do at some point. So I put the last layer I put on was a dark layer of sort of dark blue-gray. And then I just started scraping into it with these different tools, and this thing happened.
So that was almost one of the earlier ones.
Yeah, it was kind of a turning point with my working with that, where I was really teaching myself how to do it.
It's a good turning point. It has a very nice balance to it. It is completely finished, as all these works are, and yet it has a lot of detail, but it's not overdone at all.
Thank you.
It has direction, it has focus, which I think you must be a very focused person.
When I start painting, everything else disappears. I don't think about anything else.
Do you forget lunch and stuff like
that?
Oh,
I do. It gets dark, and I didn't even realize it was dark. I had to leave the studio.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Through the Looking Glass, which is so different. It's so misty and light and pastel.
That one was actually part of a diptych, but the other one I've put aside because I think I put too much there, so I have to go back to it. Haven't gone back to it yet, but I was using a color palette just with 2 colors, basically orange and blue, and so a little black and white, of course, but just, exploring
I think that
the
what is up
marks
there
and
now
everything.
makes a nice pair. I don't know if
That's
we
what
call
somebody
it a
else said
diptych
too.
or not. But there's nothing wrong with having a diptych that is light and dark or hot and cold next
Sure.
to each other. I think that that is sort of an interesting idea. Do you think that when you finish this one, if it isn't sold as a singular piece or as a pair, do you think you'll try to recreate it into a diptych with that panel that you've put aside?
I might. Yeah. Yeah.
Just depends.
There were so many layers on those two paintings.
Mm-hmm.
I worked on them for quite a while, and I had so much fun with it. But I just kept adding more layers, and so there is a lot of depth in that one, I think. And the other one, I like it, but it's not finished. So
You talk
we'll see
a
what
lot
happens.
about depth in your work, and I can see that in every one. And I wouldn't have thought of that word because they're very definitely flat. They very definitely present themselves as flat pictures and squares and arrangements of colors. But then the word depth, I think, has a lot of meaning for them because maybe they're not very deep in an illusionistic way, but I think in that poetical, romantic, historic, memory way, there are a lot of layers. There is a lot of depth. And like an onion, you can peel back.
Yeah, I like
see
that.
the
I like
core.
to just think you. Now, not all of them are like that, but I like the idea of looking back through, seeing through, and kind of a push-pull between
Yes.
opaque and transparency and.
The way you leave little
Contrast
windows
and stuff.
sometimes in your veils that you can see maybe to the very first color you put on. A little bit of a teasing type thing, which is really, again, very playful and yet very thoughtful. I like your work very much because of those two qualities that seem at odds, but you seem to bring them together beautifully.
I enjoy it very much. I really love it.
Well, Susan,
Doing it.
I think we've done it again. Talked about your work in, I think, very successful way. And I hope everyone can come in and see this show. Again, this is Ellen Fischer. I'm here, have been speaking with Susan Hale, and we're at the Center for Spiritual Care. And come in and see the show. It's up all month. Bye.
Ellen, it's great speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
How do we do?
Awesome.